Wizards of the Coast has once again dropped the ban hammer. This time, they are targeting both Affinity and TRON, trying to take out two birds with one stone.
Magic. I am a wizard! History. I'm an old wizard! The magic historian. My bones hurt.
Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. My friends, I was not lying in the last video when I told you it is a big news day. If you didn't already know, Wizards of the Coast announced a new secret layer today. They also announced product delays today. So if you haven't seen that video, I will leave a link to it at the end of this video. But we are here to discuss the new Pauper bannings. Like I said, Wizards of the Coast was aiming at two decks, Affinity and TRON, and they went in pretty heavy, at least in terms of Paupers. So, the first card that got put up on the chopping block is an ancient oldie by the name of ATOG, and this card has actually proven itself to be considerably powerful in a number of different formats over time. It is a cheap little threat. 1 red and 1 gets you a 1/2 creature that has the ability sacrifice an artifact. It gets +2/+2 until end of turn. But I mean, take a look at the old school wording they used to use for this. 0, +2/+2 until end of turn. Each time you use this ability, you must choose one of your artifacts in play and place it in the graveyard. This artifact cannot be one that's already on its way to the graveyard, and artifact creatures killed this way can't be regenerated. This was before they had the easy byword of sacrifice, and you can see how clunky the old school wording was. But imagine this back in the day when people had all kinds of Moxes, Black Lotus, the craziness. You would feed out a bunch of artifacts and you just throw them to the ATOG. He is surprisingly versatile. So he proved himself originally at the very beginning of the game. Like when Magic first started, this was back in antiquity. So we're talking mid-90s. And then the ATOG managed to kind of resurface again when the Mirrodin block showed up. All of a sudden, in standard, ATOG was like, yo, I'm back. And it looks like everything is dinner for me. And it was a decently powerful card. But over time, Magic has become more and more powerful in terms of the cards you see in Standard and other environments, and the ATOG's power level isn't that strong comparatively. However, when you move into the Pauper format, all of a sudden, the power scale is much different, right? A lot of commons are just inherently weaker than cards of higher rarity. And the ATOG can be an absolute blowout. He works in a number of different ways to help these affinity decks. The affinity decks are all about getting out cheap artifacts quickly, right? Use the fact that affinity will reduce the cost of your artifacts, have a lot of cheap little donk artifacts that don't really matter to you, and then you meet the conditions of affinity, plus you have a bunch of food for the ATOG. And things would get dirty when people would take the ATOG and Disciples of the Vault, because now all of a sudden you can feed artifacts to your ATOG, the Disciple of the Vault turns around and goes, hey, every artifact that ATOG eats, I'm going to make you lose a life. And this is a direct ability. This isn't attacking or anything else. So you could literally just feed a bunch of cards to the ATOG and it would set off the Disciple of the Vault. But at the same time, the ATOG would be growing bigger and bigger and bigger. It just does too much. By today's standards, it might not seem that crazy, but once you limit the power scope, the fact that this is a repeatable sack engine, you pay no mana to sacrifice artifacts. So it's a free sacrifice outlet that at the same time grows, and it's incredibly mana efficient as well. The only way to make this more efficient would be to cut it down to 1 mana. So ultimately, they were originally looking at other cards like cutting the Disciple, but they decided that ATOG is just too good of a deal, and they ultimately decided to axe it. And I understand it, because I have seen ATOG's power in multiple different iterations, like I said. So this doesn't seem too crazy to me. And now, obviously, as a side effect of this, what they have to do is they have to turn around and also nerf TRON, because affinity decks showed up to a crazy degree. We're talking, as far as I understand the numbers, affinity was like 2/3 of the decks you'd run into. Like, people played affinity so much, but whenever there's a ban that happens, it creates a vacuum of power, and that can either be kind of spread out amongst a bunch of other decks, which is what you want. You really want, like, you know, paper, rock, scissors style setup, preferably with maybe 6 or 7 different types of items that all cancel each other out in different ways, so you have a whole range of different decks. But even just getting yourself to a 3 or 4 deck style is way better than a 1 or 2 deck scenario where there are so few deck options. You're like, you play the absolute best deck because it's so much better than the other decks, you'd be insane not to play it, right? Like, affinity is so powerful that people would run crazy amounts of artifact destruction, not only in their sideboards, but in their main decks too. Just because affinity was showing up so often and was so strong, it would actually be worth it for you to take up main slots in your deck with dedicated artifact destruction, right? That shows you the level of warping that happens. So you nerf that deck. Now all of a sudden TRON is the second most powerful deck by a very noticeable margin, right? So it's not on affinity's level, but it's still right up there. And by nerfing affinity, you might end up with TRON just going, ha ha, thanks for clearing the throne for me, boys. And then it just walks up and sits down and goes, I'm in charge now, because TRON is insane, right? This, again, it's funny, goes all the way back to the original Antiquities days, where you have the Urza lands, where on their own, they're whatever, they tap for a colorless mana, whoop-de-doo. You get out 3, though, all of a sudden, now you can get 7 mana. 3 lands gets you 7 mana. That's bonkers. I am fully of the mind that the Urza lands are going to have to one day get banned in Pauper. People won't like it. I totally understand that. I get it. But at the same time, the point is to keep cards that are too powerful out of Pauper, isn't it? And 3 lands that can give you 7 mana like that, it's just too nuts to me. So I feel like eventually that's going to get banned, but that's not what happened today. They decided to leave the TRON lands because there'd be a huge uproar. Are you kidding me? Imagine they establish a Pauper format panel. The first day these guys are in charge of the format, they go, we're ganking TRON lands. There would be riots in the streets, bro. Do you know what I mean? People would be going nuts, gnashing their teeth, tearing down walls. It would be insanity. So they went a different route with it. Originally, they were looking at ways to make the deck weaker. Maybe they take away the fog effects, but then they decided, that just kind of weakens the deck against other like aggressive decks, but doesn't really help any other style of deck. They considered some other things, like maybe we get rid of crop rotation so they can't set up their Urza land setup that quickly. But ultimately the decision was reached that one of the big problems with the TRON deck is they get to play like 5 color good stuff, where the limitation of the Urza's lands, where it's like, yo, you get 7 mana, but it's colorless, doesn't really matter, because there's multiple ways to go ahead and turn that colorless mana into colored mana. So as a result, they decided to ban 2 artifacts. They went ahead and nailed Prophetic Prism and Bonder's Ornament. Now, these are both artifacts that fill pretty much the same kind of void. Prophetic Prism is a 2 casting cost artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, pay 1 and tap it, add 1 mana of any color. So right there, if you're getting 7 mana off your lands, that's nothing. And you're drawing a card to replace it. Like, that's really solid. I do like the artwork too, with the little gemstone that's firing that rainbow that's kind of right around the individual's eye. That's funky. But I have to admit, Bonder's Ornament is a card I like a lot more. 3 to put out, taps for a mana of any color, 4 and tap it. Each player who controls a permanent named Bonder's Ornament draws a card. This is something that I absolutely love for formats like my cube in particular, because it's a singleton format. There's only 1 Bonder's Ornament. So this thing essentially acts like an old school James Die Tome, which was an artifact that costs 4 to put out, 4 and tap it, draw a card. This one only costs 3 to put out, taps for a mana, or 4 and tap it, draw a card. Obviously, when you're playing in like a format where everybody has them, then they're going to get to draw cards too. But ultimately, I really, really like Bonder's Ornament. But it fits into that whole concept of way too easy to get access to mana of all these different colors. Now, obviously, there's other solutions for that too, but they're taking away some of the best ones, right? Prophetic Prism draws you a card. Bonder's Ornament can feed cards into your hand, and you have the colorless mana to do it. So ultimately, I see like why they made these choices, but I will admit the ATOG ban feels like it actually will solve the problem. This, I'm not sure, is actually enough to solve the problem. The Urza's lands, like I said, are so strong that I genuinely believe one day they're going to have to be banned in Pauper if you want the format, or you're just going to have to constantly nerf cards around it just to keep them in the format. One or the other. Maybe they'll always remain. I feel like it would be really difficult in a way to ban Tron. Anyhow, that wraps up the discussion on the banned cards. Do not leave comments below. Do not like or subscribe. However, if you so desire, you may click on one of the videos on the screen. I suggest going and checking out the earlier news from today. Big thank you to my patrons. See you guys next time.